The night hung heavy over the Russo estate, a sprawling mansion nestled in the wealthy suburbs of northern New Jersey. Rain had been threatening all evening, and now it came down in sheets, drumming against the tall windows and creating rivers along the cobblestone driveway. The house stood like a fortress, 3 stories of cream-colored stone, surrounded by manicured lawns and iron gates that whispered of old money and older secrets. Inside, the silence was almost sacred. Diane Mitchell moved through the ground floor with practiced efficiency, her soft-soled shoes making no sound against the polished marble. At 42, she'd perfected the art of invisibility, a necessary skill in a house like this. Her dark skin glistened slightly from the humidity, and she'd tied her hair back in a simple bun, practical and neat. She wore her standard uniform, black slacks and a crisp white blouse. Nothing that would draw attention. She'd worked for Vincent Russo for 3 years now. 3 years of watching, learning, staying silent. Most people in her position would have quit after the first month. The tension in this house was thick enough to choke on, but Diane had her reasons for staying. Good reasons. A 14-year-old son in a private school that cost more than most people's yearly salary. A sick mother in an assisted living facility with round-the-clock care. Bills that never stopped coming. Vincent Russo paid well, very well, and he paid on time. The grandfather clock in the entrance hall chimed twice, 2 in the morning. Diane paused in the kitchen, wiping down counters that were already spotless. Mr. Russo hadn't come home yet, which wasn't unusual. His business meetings often ran late. She'd learned not to ask questions about the dark sedans that pulled up at odd hours, or the men in expensive suits who spoke in low voices and never smiled. She'd learned not to see things. The kitchen was her domain at this hour. A massive space of stainless steel and white marble, with an island big enough to serve 20 people. Not that Mr. Russo ever entertained anymore. The house that could hold lavish parties stood mostly empty, echoing with footsteps and old ghosts. Diane was just folding the dish towel when she heard it, the low rumble of a car engine outside. Her hands still, she moved to the window, careful to stay back from the glass, and watched as Vincent's black Mercedes pulled through the gates. The car moved slower than usual, almost hesitant. Something was wrong. She'd developed an instinct for these things, a sixth sense born from 3 years of reading the subtle shifts in atmosphere that preceded trouble. The way the air seemed to compress before a storm. The car door opened, and Vincent Russo stepped out into the rain. Even from a distance, Diane could see he was different tonight. His movements were stiff, mechanical. His usually impeccable black suit looked rumpled, and he stood in the downpour for a long moment, his face tilted up to the sky as if he were washing something away, something invisible. Diane's heart picked up speed. She moved away from the window and positioned herself near the kitchen entrance, in the shadows where she could observe without being observed. An old habit. The front door opened with a heavy click that echoed through the silent house. Vincent stepped inside, and Diane's breath caught. His white shirt, visible beneath his open jacket, had dark stains across the front. His tie was missing. His salt and pepper hair, usually slicked back with precision, hung wet and disheveled across his forehead. But it was his eyes that truly alarmed her. They were distant, unfocused, like a man who'd seen something that had temporarily separated his soul from his body. He was 53, but looked older tonight, the lines around his mouth deeper, carved by whatever had happened in the hours since he'd left the house that afternoon. Vincent closed the door behind him and stood in the marble foyer, water dripping from his clothes onto the pristine floor. He didn't move to take off his jacket, didn't call out, just stood there breathing. Diane remained perfectly still in her shadowed corner. This was the dance they did. She existed in the margins of his life, present but not intrusive. He barely acknowledged her most days, which suited them both fine. But tonight, something made her stay alert. Every muscle in her body was tense. Vincent finally moved, his expensive Italian shoes squeaking slightly on the wet marble. He walked toward the grand staircase with heavy steps, one hand trailing along the banister. He looked exhausted in a way that went deeper than physical tiredness. This was the exhaustion of a man who'd made hard decisions and would live with them forever. As he reached the base of the stairs, he paused. For a moment, Diane thought he'd sensed her presence, but he was looking at something else. A framed photograph on the side table. His late wife, Maria. She died 6 years ago. Cancer. It was one of the few personal details Diane knew about him. Vincent's jaw tightened, and he looked away from the photograph, continuing up the stairs. Diane waited until his footsteps faded on the second floor before she moved. Her instinct told her to check the locks, make sure the security system was armed. Mr. Russo was usually meticulous about these things, but tonight he'd walked in like a ghost, focused on nothing but getting inside. She moved quietly through the ground floor, checking windows and doors. Everything was secure. The rain continued its assault on the windows, and occasional lightning lit up the manicured grounds outside. As she passed through the dining room, a cavernous space with a table that could seat 20, she noticed something that made her stop cold. Muddy footprints, not from the front entrance where Mr. Russo had come in. These were near the French doors that led to the back terrace. Small pools of water surrounded them, and the prints led across the pristine carpet toward the hallway that connected to the back stairs that led directly to the second floor, to Mr. Russo's private wing. Diane's heart hammered in her chest. She moved closer, crouching down to examine the prints. They were fresh, water still gleaming on the carpet fibers, and they were smaller than Mr. Russo's feet. Someone else had been here, or was still here. Her mind raced. The security system hadn't been triggered, which meant either the person knew the code or they'd found another way in. The French doors showed no signs of forced entry, but Diane knew these old mansions had secrets, servant passages, old coal chutes, ways in and out that modern security systems didn't account for. She straightened up, her breathing shallow. Every instinct screamed at her to call the police, to get out of the house. But years of working for Vincent Russo had taught her that involving the authorities was never the first option. His world didn't work that way. Instead, she moved silently toward the back hallway, following the wet prints. They led to the service stairs, narrow, enclosed stairs that the household staff had used back when places like this employed dozens of people. Now, hardly anyone used them. Diane herself preferred the main staircase when Mr. Russo wasn't home. The prints went up. Diane stood at the base of the stairs, her hand gripping the wooden railing. She should wake Mr. Russo. She should tell him. But what if she was wrong? What if these were old prints she'd somehow missed during her earlier cleaning? Mr. Russo didn't tolerate mistakes or paranoia. But no, she'd cleaned these floors herself just 3 hours ago. These prints were fresh. She made a decision, moving as quietly as she'd learned to move in this house. Diane climbed the service stairs. Each step seemed to creak despite her care, the old wood protesting under her weight. The stairwell was dark, lit only by a dim bulb at the top, and shadows pooled in the corners like living things. She reached the second floor and emerged into the hallway near the west wing, Mr. Russo's private quarters. The thick carpet here muffled all sound. Several doors lined the hallway, guest rooms that were never used, a library, and at the far end, Mr. Russo's master suite. The muddy prints continued down the hallway, growing fainter with each step as the water dried. They led directly to Mr. Russo's bedroom door. Diane's blood ran cold. She could see a thin line of light under his door. He was still awake. She heard water running, the shower. He was washing away whatever had stained his shirt, whatever had happened tonight, and someone else was in his room, or near it. Diane pressed herself against the wall, trying to control her breathing, trying to think. She looked down the hallway and noticed something else. One of the guest room doors was slightly ajar, the room directly across from Mr. Russo's suite. That door was always closed. She knew, because she'd cleaned that room yesterday afternoon, and she'd pulled the door firmly shut behind her. Someone had opened it. Someone was waiting. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't a random break-in. This was planned. Someone had gotten into the house, positioned themselves, and was waiting for the right moment. The water stopped running in Mr. Russo's bathroom. Diane's decision came in an instant, pure instinct overriding fear. She moved quickly down the hallway, her soft shoes silent on the carpet. She didn't knock, didn't hesitate. She pushed open Mr. Russo's bedroom door and stepped inside. The room was massive, a king-sized bed with dark bedding, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the grounds, elegant furniture that probably cost more than Diane's yearly salary. The bathroom door was still closed, steam seeping out from underneath, and across the hall through Mr. Russo's open door she could see it clearly now. The guest room door was opening wider. A shadow moved inside, the shape of a person. "Mr. Russo!" Diane's voice came out sharp, urgent. The bathroom door opened, and Vincent emerged in a black robe, his hair wet, his face startled. He'd never heard her speak above a whisper, certainly never heard her shout. "What are you—" "Shut up!" Diane cut him off, her voice a harsh whisper now, her hand making a violent cutting motion in the air. "There's someone in your room." Vincent froze, his entire body going rigid. For a moment, he looked at her like she'd lost her mind. Then his eyes shifted, taking in her expression, the genuine terror written across her face, and something changed in him. The exhausted man vanished. In his place stood someone else entirely, someone dangerous. He moved with sudden grace, reaching behind a small panel on the wall near his bed, a panel Diane had noticed but never investigated. His hand emerged, holding something dark and heavy, a weapon. They stood there in the dimmed bedroom, the rain hammering against the windows, both of them frozen in that terrible moment of realization. Someone was in the house, someone who knew Vincent Russo's routine, his security, his private spaces, someone who'd been waiting for him to come home vulnerable, exhausted, distracted by whatever had happened tonight. And only Diane's vigilance, her habit of seeing things she wasn't supposed to see, had given them this chance. Vincent's eyes met hers across the room, and in that look something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, an understanding that the normal rules of their employer-employee relationship had just shattered. Outside the bedroom, in the dark hallway, there was a sound, the softest creak of floorboard. Someone was moving. The silence that followed the creak was suffocating. Vincent's eyes locked onto Diane's, and in that fraction of a second, an entire conversation happened without words. His hand tightened around the grip of his weapon, his jaw set with grim determination. He raised one finger to his lips, a universal gesture for silence, and motioned for her to move behind him. But Diane didn't move toward him. Instead, she took 3 quick, silent steps to the bedroom door and gently, carefully pushed it closed until only the smallest crack remained, just enough to see through, just enough to hear. Vincent's eyebrows raised slightly, surprised by her initiative, perhaps even impressed. He repositioned himself beside the door, his back against the wall, weapon held low and ready. Professional. This wasn't the first time he'd prepared for violence. Through the crack in the door, they could see the hallway bathed in the dim amber glow of the wall sconces. Shadows stretched and bent along the walls, creating shapes that looked almost alive in the flickering light. The rain outside intensified, and thunder rumbled in the distance, low and ominous. Another creak, closer now. Diane's heart pounded so hard she was certain whoever was out there could hear it. She pressed herself against the wall beside Vincent, acutely aware of how close they were, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body, to smell the expensive soap he'd just used in the shower mixed with something else, something metallic that she tried not to identify. Vincent leaned toward her, his mouth near her ear, his voice barely a whisper. How many? Diane held up one finger. At least she'd only seen evidence of one person, but could she be certain? Her mind raced back through the evening, the muddy footprints, the slightly open door. She'd been so focused on those details that she might have missed others. She raised her hand and made it a questioning gesture, one that she knew of, maybe more. Vincent's expression darkened. He understood the implications. The floorboard creaked again, and this time they saw a shadow moving along the hallway wall, slow, deliberate. Someone was walking toward the bedroom door, taking their time, confident in their approach. Vincent's finger moved to the trigger guard of his weapon. Diane watched his face, saw the cold calculation there. This was a man who'd made life and death decisions before, many times. The weight of that reality pressed down on her. She was standing next to someone who could end a life without hesitation, but right now, that was exactly who she needed him to be. The shadow stopped outside the door. Diane could see the edge of a shoe, dark leather, expensive looking, just visible in the crack. Whoever was out there was standing directly on the other side of the door, mere inches away from them. She could hear breathing now, soft and controlled, waiting. The doorknob began to turn. Vincent raised his weapon, aiming at chest height where the intruder would appear. His face was a mask of controlled fury. Diane found herself holding her breath, her entire body rigid with tension. The door opened slowly, incrementally, an inch, 2 inches, and then the sharp trill of a phone ringing shattered the silence. Not Vincent's phone. The sound came from the hallway, muffled but distinct. The intruder's phone. The door stopped opening. Through the crack, Diane saw the shadow shift, heard a muttered curse, male voice, young. The footsteps retreated quickly, moving away from the bedroom door, back toward the guest room. Vincent moved instantly. He pulled the bedroom door open and stepped into the hallway, weapon raised, his movements fluid and practiced. Don't move! Diane's view widened as the door opened fully. She could see the figure now. A man, mid-20s, lean and athletic in dark clothing. He stood frozen halfway down the hall, one hand reaching for his pocket where the phone continued to ring. His face registered shock, then something else. Recognition. Mr. Russo, the young man said, his voice steady despite the weapon pointed at him. You weren't supposed to be home yet. Marco. Vincent's voice was ice. You've got 10 seconds to explain why you're in my house at 3 in the morning. Marco. Diane's mind cataloged the name. She'd heard it before. One of Mr. Russo's business associates. Younger than the others, ambitious. He'd been to the house maybe a dozen times over the past year. Always respectful, always professional. She'd served him coffee in the study during meetings. She'd never suspected. It's not what you think, Marco said, raising his hand slowly. The phone stopped ringing, and the silence rushed back in. I came to warn you. There's been talk. People in the organization, they're saying things. With muddy feet through my back door? Vincent's weapon didn't waver. Breaking into guest rooms? That's how you deliver warnings now? Marco's composure cracked slightly. His eyes darted past Vincent to Diane, still standing in the bedroom doorway. Something flickered across his face, surprise that she was there. Recalculation of his plans. I tried calling, Marco said. You didn't answer. I knew you were meeting with the Calabrese family tonight, and I heard rumors that it went bad. You thought you'd let yourself into my private quarters and wait. Vincent took a step forward. You thought I wouldn't notice someone breaking my security? Diane watched the exchange, her mind working through the details. Something was wrong with Marco's story. The muddy footprints had led directly to Mr. Russo's bedroom, not to the front door to knock, not to the study where business was conducted. Someone coming to deliver a warning wouldn't hide in a guest room. And there was something else, something that had been bothering her since she'd first seen those footprints. Mr. Russo, Diane heard herself say, her voice cutting through the tension. Both men turned to look at her. Vincent's expression was sharp. This wasn't the time for interruptions, but Diane had spent 3 years in this house learning to trust her instincts, and right now, every instinct was screaming that something was very wrong. The footprints, she said, keeping her voice steady. They came from outside, from the terrace, but the security system wasn't triggered. The only people who know the code are you, me, and she stopped, the realization hitting her like a truck. And people you trust, she finished quietly. Vincent's face hardened. He understood immediately what she was implying. Marco had the security code. Marco had been given access because he was trusted, because he was being groomed for higher positions in the organization. Marco's hand moved fast, reaching behind his back. Gun! Diane shouted. Vincent was already moving, diving forward as Marco pulled a weapon from his waistband. The hallway erupted into chaos. Two men grappling for control, weapons clattering against the wall. Diane pressed herself back into the doorway, her mind racing. She should run. Every rational thought told her to run, to get out of the house, to call for help, but she couldn't make her feet move. She'd spent 3 years watching, learning this house, understanding its rhythms and secrets, and right now, that knowledge might be the only advantage they had. The men crashed against the hallway wall, sending a decorative table toppling. A vase shattered on the floor. Marco was younger, faster, but Vincent fought with the desperate strength of a man who'd survived decades in a world that ate the weak. Diane's eyes scanned the hallway frantically. The guest room door was still open, light spilling out into the corridor. Something made her move toward it. Curiosity, instinct, desperation. She slipped past the fighting men and into the guest room. What she saw made her blood run cold. The room had been converted into a staging area. On the bed lay a rifle, long, black, equipped with a scope. Professional. Next to it were photographs, surveillance photos of Mr. Russo, coming and going from the house, at restaurants, getting into his car. Someone had been watching him for weeks, maybe months, and there on the nightstand a phone, not Marco's personal phone that was still ringing occasionally from his pocket. This was a burner phone, and its screen showed a text conversation. The most recent message sent just minutes ago. He's home in position 15 minutes. 15 minutes. This wasn't a solo operation. Marco wasn't here alone. Diane grabbed the phone and ran back into the hallway just as Vincent got the upper hand, pinning Marco against the wall with one arm pressed against his throat. Marco's weapon had skidded away across the carpet. Mr. Russo. Diane thrust the phone toward him. He's not alone. Someone else is coming. 15 minutes. Probably less now. Vincent's eyes flicked to the phone screen, and she saw the moment the reality set in. His face went from angry to coldly calculating in an instant. How many? He demanded, pressing harder against Marco's throat. Marco's face was turning red, but he managed to smile, a terrible, knowing smile. Enough. Vincent released him slightly, just enough for Marco to breathe. Who sent you? Calabrese. Marco coughed, then laughed. A harsh, bitter sound. You really don't know, do you? You've been so focused on external threats that you never saw what was happening in your own house. Talk. The family is done with you, Vincent. Your old news, old ways. They want someone younger, someone who understands how business works now, someone who can bring the organization into the future. So they sent you to what? Kill me in my own bedroom? Marco's smile widened. They sent me to make it look like the Calabrese hit succeeded. Everyone knows tonight's meeting went bad. Everyone knows there was violence. When they find you tomorrow, eliminated in your own home, it'll just confirm what everyone already suspects. That the Calabrese family finally made their move. Diane felt sick. The casual way he discussed taking someone's life, the calculated nature of the betrayal. It was a world she'd known existed around her, but had never seen so clearly. But you're sloppy, Vincent said coldly. You left evidence. You got caught by the maid. Marco's eyes cut to Diane, and there was genuine frustration there. That wasn't part of the calculation. Who expects the help to be paying attention? The words stung, but Diane kept her face neutral. She'd been invisible for so long that people had forgotten she could see, could think, could act. How long until your backup arrives? Vincent demanded. Marco glanced at his watch. Should be here any minute now. 2 cars, 8 men, all armed, all very motivated. His smile was cold. You can end this easy, Vincent. Let me finish the job. Quick, clean. Or you can try to fight and it'll be messy. Your choice. Vincent's jaw tightened. Diane could see him calculating odds, considering options. The house was large, but 8 armed men would search every room. The police would take too long to arrive, and calling them would bring questions Vincent clearly didn't want to answer. The panic room, Diane said suddenly. Both men looked at her. The study, she continued, thinking fast. Behind the bookshelf. I've seen you go in there during emergencies. It's reinforced, isn't it? Steel door? Vincent stared at her, clearly surprised she knew about it. But there was no time for questions about how the maid had noticed things she wasn't supposed to notice. It would buy us time, Diane pressed. They can't get through that door quickly. We could call for help for people you trust. There's no one I can trust, Vincent interrupted bitterly. Marco just made that clear. Then we call the police, Diane said firmly. I know you don't want that, but dead is worse than arrested. Vincent's expression was torn, pride warring with survival instinct. In his world, involving law enforcement was the ultimate failure, but Diane was right. Dead was definitely worse. They're already here, Marco said, his smile triumphant. I can hear the cars, and he was right. In the distance, beneath the sound of rain, Diane heard it, the low rumble of engines, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Vincent made his decision. Move, he ordered, shoving Marco ahead of him down the hallway toward the main staircase. To Diane, stay behind me. Don't make a sound. They moved quickly through the darkened house, Vincent keeping his weapon pressed against Marco's back, Diane following close behind. The study was on the first floor, opposite side of the house from the main entrance. If they could reach it before the men came inside, they made it down the stairs just as they heard the front door burst open. Footsteps echoed through the entrance hall, multiple sets moving with military precision. Voices called out in low, professional tones, coordinating a search. Vincent pulled Marco into the study and Diane followed, closing the door silently behind them. The study was lined with bookshelves dominated by a massive mahogany desk. Vincent moved to the far wall and pressed a hidden switch. A section of the bookshelf swung inward, revealing a steel door with a keypad. He entered the code quickly, and the door opened with a pneumatic hiss. "Inside," he whispered. Diane slipped through the opening into a small room, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with concrete walls, a single chair, and a bank of security monitors showing different views of the house. This was Vincent's last resort, his final sanctuary. Vincent shoved Marco inside roughly, then followed, pulling the heavy door closed behind them. The locks engaged with a series of solid clicks that sounded final, permanent. They were sealed in. On the monitors, they could see it all. The men spreading through the house, searching room by room, weapons drawn, faces hard and professional. 8 men, just as Marco had said. They moved like they knew the layout, like they'd planned this carefully. Vincent stood beside the monitors, his face illuminated by their pale glow, and Diane saw something she'd never seen before in her 3 years of working for him. Fear, not panic. Vincent Russo was too controlled for that, but the cold recognition that his world was crumbling, that the power and protection he'd built over decades had turned against him in a single night. And standing next to him, trapped in a concrete box while armed men searched for them, Diane Mitchell realized that her invisible life had just ended. She'd stepped into the light, spoken up, taken action. There was no going back to being unseen. Marco leaned against the concrete wall, his hands now bound with zip ties Vincent had produced from a drawer. His smile hadn't faded. "This just delays the inevitable," he said. "They'll find a way in, or they'll wait you out. Either way, you're finished." Vincent didn't respond. He was staring at the monitors, watching the men tear through his house, and Diane could see him thinking, calculating, trying to find an angle, a way out. Outside the panic room, she heard footsteps approaching the study. Someone tried the door handle. All 3 of them froze, barely breathing, as the door opened and 2 armed figures entered the study. On the monitor, Diane watched them search the room, looking behind furniture, checking windows. One of them stopped in front of the bookshelf that concealed the panic room door. His hand reached out, touching the wood, and Diane's heart stopped beating. The man's hand lingered on the bookshelf for what felt like an eternity. Inside the panic room, Vincent, Diane, and Marco stood frozen like statues. The only sound was their collective breathing. Shallow, controlled, barely audible even to each other. On the security monitor, Diane watched the man's face in grainy black and white as he examined the bookshelf, his fingers tracing the edges of the wood paneling. He was young, maybe 30, with sharp features and cold eyes. Professional, not the kind of person who missed details. "Anything?" Another man's voice came from off-screen. The first man hesitated, his hand still on the shelf. "Something's off about this wall. The spacing doesn't match the rest of the room." Diane's pulse hammered in her ears. She glanced at Vincent, whose jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscles jumping beneath his skin. His weapon was raised, pointed at the steel door, ready for whatever came next. "You want me to check it out?" the second voice asked. "Nah," the first man said, finally dropping his hand. "It's probably just the way these old houses are built. Nothing in here but books and dust. Let's keep moving." The 2 figures disappeared from the monitor, their footsteps fading as they moved deeper into the house. Diane released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding, her legs suddenly weak beneath her. "They'll be back," Marco said from his position against the wall, his voice carrying a note of satisfaction. "They're thorough. Give them 20 minutes to search the whole house. Then they'll start looking harder, tearing up floorboards, checking walls." Vincent lowered his weapon slightly but kept it ready. "Then we have 20 minutes to figure a way out of this." "There is no way out," Marco replied. "That's the beauty of it. You built yourself the perfect cage." Diane moved closer to the monitors, studying the feeds. The house had 12 cameras positioned strategically throughout. Entrance hall, kitchen, living areas, hallways. She watched the men move through each space with military precision, communicating through hand signals and brief words. "How many people knew about this room?" she asked, her mind working through the angles. 3, Vincent said. "Me, my late wife, and the contractor who built it. The contractor died 5 years ago. Natural causes." "So how did they know to look here?" Diane pressed. "In the study specifically?" Vincent's expression darkened. "They shouldn't. This location isn't documented anywhere. No blueprints, no permits. It was off the books. Then they're searching the whole house systematically," Diane reasoned. "They don't know where you are. They're just being thorough." Marco's laugh was bitter. "You think like a maid. Limited perspective. They know he's in here somewhere because his car is in the driveway. The house is locked from the inside, and he didn't leave on foot. Basic elimination." "Shut up," Vincent snapped, but his eyes remained on the monitors. "Diane's right. They're searching blind. That gives us an advantage." "What advantage?" Diane asked. "We're trapped in a concrete box." Vincent moved to a small panel on the wall and opened it, revealing a satellite phone and what looked like a radio system. "This room was designed for exactly this scenario. I can make calls that can't be traced or intercepted. I have contacts who can be here in 30 minutes, maybe less." "Contacts who aren't trying to end you," Marco interjected. "Good luck with that. The organization has been planning this for months. Everyone who mattered was brought on board. The few who refused," he made a gesture like a scale tipping. "They had accidents, retired early, disappeared." Vincent's hand paused over the phone. "Dominic, car accident. 3 weeks ago. Santino, heart attack. Very sudden. Marco's smile was cruel. You've been isolated and didn't even realize it. They picked off your loyal people one by one, quietly, professionally. By the time tonight came around, you were alone. Diane watched Vincent's face as the reality settled over him. The betrayal wasn't just Marco showing up with a weapon. It was systematic, comprehensive, a slow dismantling of everything he'd built, the kind of betrayal that took planning and coordination at the highest levels. Who's running this? Vincent asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Who gave the order? Marco tilted his head, considering. Does it matter? You're finished either way. It matters to me. The two men stared at each other, and Diane recognized the dynamic. This was about respect, about the codes and hierarchies of their world. Even facing the end, Vincent needed to know who had beaten him. Marco sighed. Tommy Calabrese. But you already suspected that, didn't you? Tonight's meeting was a setup from the start. They wanted you angry, distracted, vulnerable. The argument with Calabrese was theater. While you were focused on external threats, they were positioning pieces for the real move. Tommy's been my partner for 15 years, Vincent said, and for the first time Diane heard something like hurt in his voice. Not just anger, actual emotional pain. And he's been planning this for at least 2, Marco replied. You should have seen it coming. The business is changing. Your generation's way of doing things. The honor codes, the handshake deals, the loyalty. It's all outdated. Tommy understands that. He's building something new. Something more efficient, and you were in the way. Vincent was silent for a long moment, processing. Then he turned back to the satellite phone and began dialing. Who are you calling? Diane asked. Someone who owes me, someone who might still honor old debts. The phone rang, and rang. No answer. Vincent tried another number. Same result. A third number. Voicemail. Marco's expression was smug. I told you, they've been thorough. Everyone you trust either betrayed you or is too scared to pick up the phone. You're alone. Vincent slammed the phone down, his control finally cracking. 20 years I gave to building this organization. 20 years of sacrifice, of making hard choices, of protecting people who couldn't protect themselves. And this is how it ends? Trapped in my own house by people I trained? That's how it always ends, Marco said quietly. The old makes way for the new. Your mentor probably felt the same way when you made your move against him. That was different. He was corrupt, skimming from the family funds, putting everyone at risk. And you're old, set in your ways, refusing to evolve. Same thing. Different generation. Marco's voice was almost philosophical. Don't take it personally. It's just business. Diane had been silent through this exchange, but now she spoke up. Your phone. Both men looked at her. The phone from the guest room, she clarified, pulling it from her pocket where she'd stashed it earlier. The one Marco was using to communicate with his backup. Can we use it? Vincent's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. What are you thinking? They're in communication, Diane reasoned. They must be reporting back to someone. Tommy Calabrese probably. What if we used Marco's phone to send a message? Buy ourselves time. They'll know it's not me, Marco said. We have codes, specific phrases. Then you'll tell us what to say, Vincent replied, moving toward Diane. He took the phone and examined it. And you'll do it convincingly, or I'll make sure the concrete walls of this room are the last thing you ever see. The threat hung in the air, and Diane saw Marco's confidence waver for the first time. Whatever bravado he'd been displaying, he clearly understood that Vincent was serious. What do you want me to tell them? Marco asked. That you eliminated the target, Vincent said. That it's done. Tell them to pull back and wait for you to exit the property. They won't believe that. They'll want confirmation photos. Then you'll think of something convincing. Vincent pressed the cold barrel of his weapon against Marco's temple. Because your life depends on it. Marco swallowed hard, his earlier smugness evaporating. Okay, give me the phone. Vincent held the phone up but didn't hand it over. Speaker mode. You say exactly what I tell you, nothing more. One wrong word and we're done talking. He began typing a message, showing it to Marco. Marco read it, nodded reluctantly, and Vincent sent it. The response came within seconds. Confirmation required. They want proof, Marco said. Photos of the body. That was always part of the protocol. Diane's mind raced. Can we fake it? Use the security cameras somehow? Vincent studied the monitors, his expression calculating. On screen, the men were regrouping in the entrance hall, clearly frustrated by their inability to find their target. They were talking among themselves, pointing at different areas of the house. The lighting's wrong, Vincent muttered, and they'd recognize the camera angles. But he trailed off, thinking, but what? Diane pressed. There's a camera in the garage. Different system, older model. If we could stage something there, they'll investigate. Marco interrupted. The moment you open this door to get to the garage, they'll hear it. The door mechanism is pneumatic. It's loud. Then we create a distraction, Diane said, surprised by her own boldness. Something that pulls them to the other side of the house. Vincent looked at her with new respect. Like what? Diane pointed to the monitors. The kitchen has a gas stove. If we could trigger it remotely, create a small fire or at least smoke. There's no remote trigger, Vincent said, but his eyes had taken on a calculating gleam. But the house has a smart system. Temperature controls, lights, security. If I can access it from here. He moved to a laptop that sat on a small shelf, booting it up quickly. His fingers flew across the keyboard. accessing programs that Diane didn't recognize. Building schematics appeared on screen, overlaid with what looked like a control interface. The smart system controls the HVAC, Vincent muttered, talking to himself as much as to them, which means I can push the temperature up dramatically in specific zones. If I max out the heat in the kitchen and dining room, combine it with blocking the ventilation, you'll trigger the smoke alarms. Diane finished, understanding his plan. They'll think there's a fire. Exactly. And while they're dealing with that, we move. Vincent's fingers continued their rapid typing. The panic room has a secondary exit, maintenance tunnel that runs beneath the house to the old coal cellar. It's not on any official plans. My wife insisted on it. She always said a safe room with only one exit wasn't safe at all. The tunnel leads outside? Diane asked. To the property edge, near the woods. About 200 yards from the house. Vincent hit a final key with emphasis. Done. Temperature's climbing. We have maybe 5 minutes before the alarms go off. On the monitors, they could already see the men reacting to something. One of them touched his face, clearly feeling the temperature increase. They were gathering in the entrance hall, discussing among themselves. Vincent moved to the back wall of the panic room and pressed another hidden switch. A section of the floor slid aside, revealing a dark opening with metal rungs descending into darkness. Ladies first, Vincent said to Diane, then caught himself. Actually, scratch that. Marco goes first. Diane, you follow him. I'll cover from behind. What about the message? Marco asked. Tommy's waiting for confirmation. We'll send it from the tunnel. One last message saying the situation is handled and you're exiting through the back. By the time they figure out it's a diversion, we'll be gone. Diane stared down into the dark tunnel, her heart pounding. Every instinct she'd developed over 42 years of life was screaming that this was insane. She was a maid, a mother, a woman who cleaned houses and kept her head down. She wasn't built for this world of violence and betrayal. But then she thought about her son, 14 years old and counting on her. She thought about the bills she had to pay, the life she'd built through sheer determination and hard work. And she realized that survival didn't care about what you were built for. It only cared about what you were willing to do. Let's go, she said firmly. Marco descended first, his hands still zip-tied but able to grip the rungs. Diane followed, the metal cold against her palms. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for her shoulders, and smelled of earth and old concrete. Above her, Vincent paused at the opening. On the laptop screen behind him, Diane could see the temperature readings spiking. Any second now, the smoke alarms erupted throughout the house, a deafening electronic shriek that even penetrated into the tunnel. On the monitors, the men in the entrance hall jumped into action, shouting to each other, some running toward the kitchen, others toward fire extinguishers mounted on the walls. Vincent descended into the tunnel and pulled the floor panel closed above them, plunging them into complete darkness. Keep moving, his voice came from above. The tunnel is straight, about 50 yards. Then it branches. Take the left branch. They moved through the darkness, the only sounds their breathing and the scrape of their shoes on the concrete floor. The tunnel was cramped, oppressive, the walls seeming to press in from all sides. Diane's hands touched the rough concrete occasionally, keeping her oriented. You know this won't work. Marco's voice echoed from ahead. Even if we get out, even if you escape tonight, Tommy has resources everywhere. He'll hunt you down. Let me worry about Tommy, Vincent replied from behind. They reached the branch point, and a dim emergency light flickered to life. Motion activated, casting everything in sickly yellow-green. The left tunnel stretched ahead, slightly wider, with what looked like electrical conduits running along the ceiling. As they moved forward, Diane's foot struck something on the floor. She looked down and saw it, a skeleton of wiring and metal, old equipment left behind, and something else, something that made her stop cold. Fresh footprints in the dust, recent ones, leading deeper into the tunnel. Mr. Russo, she said quietly, we're not alone down here. Vincent pushed past Marco, weapon raised, and saw what Diane had spotted. His face went pale in the emergency lighting. The footprints led forward, toward the exit, and then they heard it, a sound from ahead in the darkness, the unmistakable click of a weapon being cocked. A voice emerged from the shadows, familiar and devastating. Hello, Vincent. Took you long enough to figure out you needed to run. A figure stepped into the dim light, weapon raised and pointed directly at them. It was Tommy Calabrese himself, and he wasn't alone. 4 more armed figures materialized from the darkness behind him, blocking the tunnel completely. You really thought I wouldn't know about your bolt hole? Tommy said, his voice carrying decades of shared history. Vincent, I helped your wife plan this tunnel. I was here when it was built. I know everything about your house, your security, your escape routes. You taught me to think like you, to always have contingencies for contingencies. Vincent's weapon remained raised, pointed at Tommy, but Diane could see the defeat settling over him. They were trapped. Behind them, the tunnel led back to a house full of enemies. Ahead, more enemies blocked their only exit. It didn't have to be this way, Tommy continued. I gave you opportunities to retire gracefully, to step aside and enjoy your money, your house, your life. But you're too stubborn, too convinced that your way is the only way. My way kept this organization alive for 20 years, Vincent said, his voice hard. Your way is dying, Tommy replied. The world has changed, Vincent. We need to change with it or become extinct. I'm not the bad guy here. I'm the future. And Marco was right. You should have seen this coming. The two men stared at each other across the tunnel. Years of partnership and shared history, hanging between them like a ghost. And then Diane noticed something. Something none of the men had seen because they were too focused on each other. The electrical conduits running along the ceiling. They were old, wrapped in deteriorating insulation, and one of them, just above where Tommy stood, was sparking. Not much, just a tiny flickering where the wiring had worn through. An idea formed in her mind. Desperate, dangerous, probably stupid, but it was the only chance they had. Her hand moved slowly to her pocket, pulling out a small spray bottle she always carried. Cleaning solution, alcohol-based, highly flammable. In her line of work, you always carried supplies. No one was watching the invisible maid. Their eyes were on Vincent, on the weapons, on each other. Diane unscrewed the cap of the bottle as quietly as she could, and then she threw it. The bottle arced through the air, hitting the exposed wiring above Tommy's head. The alcohol-based solution sprayed across the sparking wire, and for one frozen instant, nothing happened. Then the tunnel lit up with a burst of flame. The fire erupted with a sound like tearing fabric, a brilliant orange flash that sent everyone diving for cover. Tommy and his men scattered backward, arms raised to shield their faces from the sudden heat and light. The flames climbed along the electrical conduit, feeding on the old insulation and decades of accumulated dust and grime. Smoke began filling the narrow tunnel immediately, thick and acrid. "Move!" Vincent shouted, grabbing Diane's arm and pushing Marco forward. "Now!" They ran through the chaos, keeping low beneath the worst of the smoke. Behind them, Diane could hear Tommy shouting orders to his men, hear the sound of footsteps retreating as the fire spread faster than anyone expected. The tunnel wasn't built for fire. The old materials, the poor ventilation, everything conspired to turn it into a chimney. Vincent led them forward into the darkness beyond the burning section, his free hand trailing along the wall to keep oriented. The smoke followed them, burning Diane's throat and eyes, making each breath a struggle. "There!" Vincent pointed ahead where a sliver of gray light cut through the darkness. The exit, a metal ladder leading up to what looked like a cellar door. Marco reached it first and began climbing, his bound hands making it awkward but not impossible. Diane followed, her lungs burning, her eyes streaming tears from the smoke. The metal rungs were cold and slick with condensation. Vincent came last, pausing at the base of the ladder to look back. Through the smoke, Diane could see the orange glow of flames spreading along the tunnel ceiling. She could hear voices, Tommy's men calling to each other, coughing, trying to regroup. "Go!" Vincent urged, pushing at Diane's feet. "Don't stop!" She climbed faster, her muscles screaming with effort. Marco had reached the top and was shouldering against the cellar door, trying to force it open. The old wood resisted, swollen with moisture and age. "It's stuck!" Marco shouted down. "Break it!" Vincent commanded. "Use your shoulder, ram it!" Marco threw his full weight against the door once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th impact, the wood splintered and the door burst open, spilling pre-dawn light into the tunnel. Fresh air rushed down, feeding the fire below, making it roar with renewed vigor. They scrambled out into what had once been a coal cellar, a stone structure barely larger than a shed, half collapsed and overgrown with ivy and weeds. The dawn sky above was gray and heavy with rain clouds, the storm having passed but leaving everything damp and cold. Diane collapsed on the wet grass outside, gulping air, her whole body shaking. Marco fell beside her, coughing violently. Vincent emerged last, pulling the cellar door closed behind them to slow the smoke's escape. No need to signal their exact location. They were at the edge of Vincent's property, exactly as he'd said. The woods pressed close on 3 sides, dark and deep. Behind them, perhaps 200 yards away through the trees, they could see the mansion. Smoke was beginning to billow from vents and windows. The fire in the tunnel had spread, or the earlier diversion in the kitchen had gotten out of control. "We need to move," Vincent said, his voice hoarse from smoke. "Tommy knows we came this way. He'll have men circling the property." "I can't," Diane gasped, still struggling to catch her breath. "I can't. I need a minute." "We don't have a minute." But Vincent's voice had softened slightly. He crouched beside her, his hand on her shoulder. "Diane, listen to me. You saved our lives back there. That was quick thinking with the bottle, but we're not safe yet. We need to keep moving." Diane looked up at him, this man she'd worked for in silence for 3 years, and saw something in his face she'd never seen before. Not gratitude exactly. Vincent Russo didn't do gratitude in any simple way, but recognition, respect. "Where do we go?" she asked, forcing herself to stand on shaking legs. "There's a service road about half a mile through these woods. Old access path from when this was farmland. I keep a vehicle there. Insurance policy. Always have a way out. That's the rule." "More insurance policies," Marco muttered, still coughing. "You and your paranoia might actually save you after all." Vincent hauled Marco to his feet roughly. "Move. And remember, you're only alive because you might still be useful. Don't test my patience." They started through the woods, Vincent leading, Marco in the middle with his hands still bound, Diane bringing up the rear. The forest was dense with undergrowth, wet from the night's rain, and every step seemed impossibly loud, branches snapping, leaves rustling, their labored breathing. As they walked, the reality of what had just happened began settling over Diane like a heavy blanket. She'd thrown a bottle of cleaning solution at live electrical wiring. She'd started a fire. She'd helped a man escape people who wanted him dead. She'd crossed a line she couldn't uncross. "My son," she said, suddenly stopping in her tracks. "Marcus, he's home alone. If they know I helped you, if they figure out who I am." Vincent turned back to face her. "Where does he live?" "My apartment. 30 minutes from your estate. He thinks I'm still at work." Her voice rose with panic. "If they go looking for you and decide I'm a loose end, give me the address." "What?" "Your address. Now." Vincent had pulled out a phone. Not the satellite phone from the panic room, but a regular cell phone he'd had in his robe pocket. "I still have a few people I can call. People who owe me enough to help, even if it puts them at risk." Diane rattled off her address, watching as Vincent dialed and spoke in rapid, clipped sentences to someone on the other end. The conversation was brief, coded, but she caught the essential message. "Get to this address, protect the kid, bring them both to the safe location. They'll be there in 20 minutes, Vincent said, ending the call. "My guy will take Marcus somewhere secure. You'll be able to see him once we sort this mess out." "Why?" Diane asked, the question bursting out before she could stop it. "Why are you helping me? I'm nobody. I clean your house." Vincent looked at her for a long moment, and in the gray dawn light filtering through the trees, she saw something shift in his expression. "You're not nobody. You saw what nobody else saw. You warned me when you could have stayed silent, stayed safe. You risked yourself." He paused. "In my world, that kind of loyalty is rarer than gold, and I don't forget debts." Marco laughed bitterly from where he stood a few feet away. "How touching. The crime boss finds his conscience through the help. This is like a bad movie." "Shut up," Vincent said without heat, then turned back to Diane. "Can you keep moving?" She nodded, though every muscle in her body screamed in protest. They continued through the woods, moving as quickly as the terrain allowed. The sound of sirens began echoing in the distance, fire trucks responding to the smoke from the mansion. Diane wondered what the firefighters would find when they got there. Evidence of the night's violence, bodies in tunnels, or would Tommy's people have cleaned up by then? After what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, they emerged onto an overgrown dirt road barely visible through the vegetation. Vincent led them about 100 yards down the path to where a nondescript SUV sat hidden beneath a camouflage tarp. "Help me," he ordered Diane, and together they pulled the tarp free while Vincent kept his weapon trained on Marco. The SUV was older, maybe 10 years old, chosen for its lack of modern tracking technology. Vincent checked underneath it quickly, looking for tracking devices or tampering, then unlocked it with a key hidden in a magnetic box behind the rear wheel. "Get in," he said. "Marco, you're in back. Diane, front passenger seat." They climbed in, and Vincent started the engine. It turned over smoothly. He'd clearly maintained the vehicle despite its hidden location. Within minutes, they were moving down the service road, leaving the estate and all its chaos behind them. They drove in silence for the first 10 minutes, Vincent taking them through back roads and rural routes, clearly following a pre-planned escape path. Diane watched the landscape roll by, small towns waking up to a normal Friday morning, people heading to work, kids waiting for school buses, an ordinary world that suddenly felt impossibly distant from the one she now inhabited. "Where are we going?" she finally asked. "Somewhere safe, off the grid, a place Tommy doesn't know about." Vincent glanced at her. "I need to make some calls. Reach out to people who might still be loyal. Figure out how deep this betrayal goes and who I can trust." "Nobody," Marco said from the back seat. "The answer is nobody. Tommy spent 2 years converting everyone who mattered. The few who wouldn't turn, they're dead, or too scared to help you. You're finished, Vincent. Even if you survive today, you've got nothing left." Vincent's hands tightened on the steering wheel, but he didn't respond. Diane looked back at Marco. "Why are you telling him this? You're our prisoner. Don't you want to give him hope? Keep him thinking he has options?" Marco smiled, that same cold smile he'd worn in the hallway. "Because the truth is worse than any lie I could tell. I want him to understand how completely he's been beaten, how thoroughly his world has collapsed. That's a deeper cut than anything physical." "You're a real piece of work," Diane muttered. "I'm honest," Marco corrected. "More honest than Vincent ever was. He built his empire on lies and violence, and now he's shocked that the same tools are being used against him. It's almost poetic." "My empire," Vincent said quietly, his eyes on the road, "was built on rules, on codes that meant something, on loyalty that ran both ways. I protected people who worked for me. I kept my word. That meant something." "It meant something to you," Marco replied, "to your generation. But the world moved on. Honor is expensive, loyalty is a liability, and codes are just obstacles to profit. Tommy understands that. He's building something more efficient, more ruthless, more successful, and in 10 years he'll be exactly where you are now, complaining about the new generation who doesn't respect the old ways." The observation hung in the air, and Diane realized Marco wasn't entirely wrong. This was a cycle, generations replacing each other, each one believing their way was right and the next was corrupt. In a strange way, it reminded her of her own life. Different jobs, different bosses, each one eventually replaced by someone new who did things differently. They drove for another hour, passing through 3 small towns before Vincent finally pulled off onto an even smaller side road. This one led to what looked like an abandoned farm, a small house in need of repair, a collapsed barn, fields overgrown with weeds. "This is it?" Diane asked doubtfully. Looks can be deceiving, Vincent said, pulling around to the back of the house. He parked the SUV inside what remained of the barn, hiding it from aerial view. This property belongs to someone I knew a long time ago, someone who got out of the life clean. They owe me for making that possible. They entered the house through a back door that Vincent unlocked with yet another hidden key. Inside, the house was surprisingly well maintained. The exterior was deliberate camouflage. The interior had been updated with modern appliances, comfortable furniture, and what looked like a state-of-the-art security system. A safe house, Diane said, understanding. One of several, though I'll need to assume the others are compromised now. Vincent secured Marco to a chair in the kitchen using more zip ties, then turned to Diane. There's a bathroom upstairs. First door on the right. Clean up. There should be clothes in the closet. Probably too big for you, but better than what you're wearing now. Diane looked down at herself. Her white blouse was gray with smoke and dirt, torn in several places. Her hands were scratched and bleeding from the tunnel walls. She must look like she'd been through a war, which in a way she had. Upstairs, she found the bathroom and stood under hot water for longer than she should have, washing away smoke and dirt and the physical evidence of the night. But she couldn't wash away what had happened, couldn't return to being the invisible woman who cleaned and stayed silent. When she finally emerged, wearing borrowed clothes that hung loosely on her smaller frame, she found Vincent in the living room. He'd changed too, into jeans and a dark sweater, and was sitting at a laptop, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. "Any word about Marcus?" she asked immediately. "He's safe. My guy got there before anyone else. They're at another location now, nowhere anyone would think to look. I gave him your number. You can call Marcus in a few minutes. Let him know you're okay." Relief washed over Diane so powerfully she had to sit down. "Thank you." Vincent nodded, his attention returning to the screen. "I'm reaching out to contacts, trying to get a read on the situation. So far, it's not good. Tommy's people are claiming there was a fire at my estate, that I'm missing. Possibly dead. They're controlling the narrative. Are they looking for us? Probably, but they don't know about this place, and I've been careful with our route. We should be safe here for a few days while I figure out next moves." Diane watched him work. This man who'd been just her employer hours ago and now was, what, her ally? Her protector? The person whose world she'd been dragged into against all logic and reason? "Mr. Russo," she began. "Vincent," he interrupted. "I think we're past formalities." "Vincent," she corrected. "What happens now? Long term, I mean. Even if you survive this, even if you figure out who you can trust, my life is never going back to normal. I can't go back to my apartment, my routine. Marcus and I, we're tied to this now." Vincent leaned back from the laptop, rubbing his eyes tiredly. "I know, and I'm sorry for that. You didn't ask for any of this." "Neither did you," Diane pointed out. "You came home to your own house and got betrayed by people you trusted." "True." He was silent for a moment. "I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about calling the police. In my world, that's not something we do. But maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe the old rules are what got me here." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I have a choice to make. I can try to fight Tommy, try to rebuild my power base, get revenge for what was done to me. That's what I'd normally do, what my instincts say to do." He looked at her directly. "Or I can accept that Marco was right. That world is done with me, and I can make a different choice." "What different choice?" Vincent gestured at the laptop. "I have documentation, years of it. Records of transactions, names, dates, evidence of criminal activity that would bury Tommy Calabrese and half the organization. I kept it as insurance. Leverage if I ever needed it, but I could also use it differently." Diane understood where he was going. "You're thinking about cooperating with authorities." "I'm thinking about burning it all down," Vincent said quietly. "The organization, Tommy's plans, all of it. Take them down with me if I have to go down. That would make you a target forever. Everyone in that world would want you dead. Everyone in that world already wants me dead. At least this way, I'd take them with me." He paused. "And maybe, just maybe, I'd be doing something right for once. Something my wife would have approved of." Diane thought about it, about the implications. "What about me and Marcus? If you go that route, we're witnesses. We'd be in danger." "Witness protection," Vincent said. "The federal government is very good at making people disappear when they need to. New identities, new location, financial support. It's not ideal, but it's survival. Starting over completely. New name, new life." "Yes." Diane stood and walked to the window, looking out at the overgrown fields. Dawn had fully broken now, and despite the clouds, there was light. A new day, even after the darkest night. She thought about Marcus, 14, and starting high school. About the life they'd built, modest but hers. About the bills and the struggles and the daily grind of just surviving. And then she thought about what Vincent was offering. Not survival, transformation. A chance to step out of the margins and into something different. Scary, yes. Uncertain, absolutely. But different. "If we do this," she said slowly, "I have conditions." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "You're negotiating?" "I saved your life tonight. Twice, actually. Once with the warning, once with the fire. I think I've earned the right to negotiate." A smile ghosted across Vincent's face, the first genuine smile she'd ever seen from him. "Fair enough. What are your conditions?" "First, Marcus's education. Whatever happens, wherever we end up, he finishes school. Good schools, college fund, done. Second, I want to know everything. No more being kept in the dark. No more being the help who doesn't ask questions. If we're partners in this, and that's what we are now, then I need full information." Vincent nodded slowly. "That's reasonable. Though some of what I'll tell you, you're going to wish you didn't know. I'll take that risk. Third, she turned to face him fully. When this is over, when the dust settles and we're in witness protection or wherever we end up, I want a real job, not cleaning houses, something where I can use my brain, where I can contribute. You've seen that I notice things, that I can think under pressure. I want that recognized. Vincent stood, walking over to where she stood by the window. He extended his hand formally. You have my word on all 3 conditions. And Diane, thank you for seeing what I missed, for speaking up when you could have stayed silent, for trusting me enough to follow me into that tunnel. She took his hand, shaking it firmly. Thank you for listening when I screamed at you to shut up. They both smiled at that. A moment of shared humor in the midst of chaos. From the kitchen, Marco's voice called out, "Are you two finished with your touching moment? Because I'd like to point out that Tommy is probably tearing apart the entire state looking for you, and no amount of feel-good partnership is going to change that." Vincent's smile faded. He's not wrong. We have work to do. Then let's do it, Diane said. They spent the next several hours planning. Vincent made encrypted calls, reaching out to federal contacts he'd cultivated over the years, insurance policies against exactly this kind of situation. Diane found herself contributing ideas, pointing out angles Vincent hadn't considered, asking questions that forced him to think more carefully about his approach. It was strange, this new dynamic between them. Just yesterday she'd been invisible, someone who existed on the periphery of his life. Now they were sitting across a table from each other, planning how to dismantle a criminal organization, discussing strategy like equals. By noon, they had a framework. Vincent would reach out to the FBI through a trusted intermediary. He'd offer cooperation, full disclosure of the organization's operations in exchange for protection for himself and for Diane and Marcus. The evidence he had was extensive enough that prosecutors would be very interested. It'll take time, Vincent warned. Negotiations, verification, setting up protection protocols. We're talking weeks, maybe months before everything is in place. But we'll be safe here, as safe as we can be. This location is secure, and I have resources to keep us supplied. We just need to stay low and stay patient. The phone Vincent had given her rang, the secure line for Marcus. Diane answered immediately. Mom? Her son's voice, scared but trying to sound brave, nearly broke her heart. Baby, I'm okay. I'm safe. How are you? I'm fine. This guy showed up and said you sent him, that we had to leave right away. Mom, what's happening? Why are we hiding? Diane looked at Vincent, who nodded encouragingly. Something complicated happened at work, she said carefully. Something dangerous, but we're handling it, and soon everything will be okay. Different, but okay. Can you trust me on that? There was a pause, and she could imagine Marcus processing this, trying to be mature beyond his years. Is this like witness protection stuff, like in the movies? She had to smile. Something like that, yeah. That's actually kind of cool. Will I get a new name? Maybe. Would you like that? I guess. Can I pick it? We'll see. Diane felt tears threatening. I love you, Marcus, more than anything. I'm doing all this to keep you safe. I know, Mom. I love you too. After the call ended, Diane sat holding the phone, letting the emotions wash over her. Vincent gave her space, moving to the kitchen to check on Marco and prepare something to eat. When she finally joined them in the kitchen, Marco looked up at her with that calculating expression. You're making a mistake, he said. Both of you. Vincent, you think the feds will protect you, but eventually the resources run out. The attention moves elsewhere, and you're vulnerable. And you, he looked at Diane, you're trading one kind of servitude for another. You think witness protection is freedom? It's a cage with different bars. Better than being dead, Diane replied. Is it? You'll spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, never trusting anyone, never putting down roots. That's not living. That's just slowly dying. Then it's a good thing it's not your choice to make, Vincent said, setting food on the table. Sandwiches he'd assembled from supplies in the safe house. Eat, you'll need your strength. They ate in tense silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Diane found herself thinking about what came next, the testimony she'd have to give, the life she'd have to leave behind, the uncertain future ahead. But she also thought about the moment in the hallway when she'd screamed at Vincent to shut up, the moment she'd chosen to speak instead of staying silent. That choice had led to everything else, the tunnel, the fire, this strange new partnership. She'd been invisible for so long, existing in the margins, but invisibility was its own kind of prison, and maybe, just maybe, this chaos was actually freedom. As the afternoon wore on, Vincent received confirmation that his FBI contact was interested in meeting, a preliminary discussion, feeling out what he had to offer and what he wanted in return. It was a first step. That night, as Diane lay in one of the safe house bedrooms, exhausted but unable to sleep, she heard a knock on the door. Come in, she called. Vincent entered, looking as tired as she felt. Can't sleep either. Too much adrenaline still in my system. Too many thoughts. He sat in a chair near the window. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, about being partners in this, and I realized I never asked, why did you stay working for me all these years? You clearly saw what was happening in that house. You knew the kind of person I was, the kind of business I was in. Why stay? Diane considered the question. Honestly, the money. I needed it for Marcus, for my mother, but also, she paused, trying to articulate something she'd barely admitted to herself. I think part of me was curious. Your world was so different from mine. And watching it from the shadows, I learned things about power, about how people operate, about survival. I didn't plan to learn those things, but I did. And now you're using them, Vincent observed. Now I'm using them, she agreed. Life is funny that way. You think you're just observing, just getting by, and then suddenly you're in the middle of it all. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, two unlikely allies brought together by chaos and circumstance. Vincent, Diane said finally, when this is all over, the testimony, the trials, the new identities, what will you do? Who will you be? He was quiet for a long time. I don't know, he admitted. I've been Vincent Russo, crime boss, for so long that I don't know who I am without that. Maybe that's the real punishment. Not prison or death, but having to figure out how to be a regular person. Welcome to my world, Diane said with a slight smile. Being a regular person isn't as boring as you think. I hope you're right. Another silence then. Thank you, Diane, for tonight, for all of it. You didn't have to help me. You could have walked away. Stayed out of it. No, Diane said thoughtfully. I really couldn't, because the moment I saw those footprints, the moment I understood someone was in your room, I couldn't unsee it. And I couldn't live with staying silent when I could have prevented something terrible. That's not who I am. Then you're a better person than most in my world. Better than I've been. Maybe, Diane allowed. Or maybe we're all just trying to get through life the best way we know how. Sometimes that means staying silent. Sometimes it means screaming. And sometimes, she smiled slightly, it means throwing cleaning solution at electrical wires. Vincent laughed. A real laugh. Unexpected and genuine. I still can't believe you did that. Neither can I, Diane admitted. But I'm glad I did. Outside, the sun was beginning to set on this impossible day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new plans, new uncertainties. But for now, in this moment, they were safe. Two people from completely different worlds brought together by violence and betrayal, finding an unexpected understanding. The invisible maid who'd learned to see, the powerful boss who'd lost his power but gained something more valuable, a chance at redemption. And between them, a partnership forged in the darkest night, promising an uncertain but genuine dawn.